The diplomatic shuttle touched down on the diplomatic platform of the Valorian Ascendant, and Captain Mara Chen stepped into the docking bay with her translator unit clipped to her collar and her service uniform pressed flat. She had been briefed 3 times. Humans were new to the Galactic Council, and the Valorians were old money, ancient lineage, rigid hierarchies, a species that had colonized 40 star systems before Earth had invented the steam engine. The brief had been clear: be polite, be deferential, make no waves. But the brief had not prepared her for the way Commander Vekrin would look at her when she entered the command deck, his scaled lips curling into something that might have been amusement or disdain, and the way his voice would drop into a low rumble as he said, "Ah, the prey species has arrived." She stopped walking. Her boots made no sound on the polished metal floor. Vekrin stood at the center of the command deck, surrounded by a half-circle of junior officers whose scales shimmered in hues of bronze and deep green. He was taller than her by a head, broader by half, and his eyes were the color of molten gold. He did not smile. He did not need to. The insult was there, hanging in the air like smoke. "Commander Vekrin," she said, keeping her voice level. "Captain Mara Chen, Terran Expeditionary Fleet. I'm here to finalize the treaty terms." He tilted his head, a gesture that reminded her of a bird of prey sizing up a field mouse. "Of course you are. Tell me, Captain, how does your species manage to survive in the void without claws or venom or even the decency of an exoskeleton? I have studied your biology. Soft skin, blunt teeth, no tail for balance. It is remarkable that you made it off your planet at all." The junior officers did not laugh, but she could see the glint of amusement in their eyes. She had been warned about this too. Valorians valued strength, dominance, the visible markers of power. To them, humanity was a curiosity, a species that had stumbled into the stars through sheer luck rather than merit. She could walk away. She could file a complaint. She could let the insult roll off her back and focus on the mission. But something in his tone, the casual cruelty of it, made her pause. She thought of her grandmother, who had survived 3 tours in the Pacific and never once let anyone tell her she was less than. She thought of her crew, waiting back on the Helios, watching this transmission and wondering if their captain would stand her ground. "Commander," she said, stepping forward until she was close enough to see the faint scarring along his jawline, "you're right. We don't have claws. We don't have venom. But we do have something your species seems to have forgotten." He raised one scaled brow. "And what is that?" "Interest," she said. "We don't just survive, we compound, we adapt, we remember, and when someone calls us prey, we take note, we learn, we wait. And then, when the moment is right, we hunt back with interest." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was electric. Vekrin's eyes narrowed, and for a moment she thought he might laugh or dismiss her or call security. But he did none of those things. Instead, he leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest, and said, "Interesting. Let us see if your words have weight, Captain. The treaty negotiations begin in 1 hour. I look forward to testing your claim." Mara returned to her shuttle and sat in the co-pilot's seat, her hands steady on her knees. Her translator unit blinked softly. She pulled out her datapad and reviewed the treaty terms one more time, but her mind was elsewhere. The negotiations were supposed to be a formality. Humanity needed access to the Valorian trade routes, and the Valorians had agreed in principle to open their borders in exchange for mining rights in the Kuiper Belt. It was a good deal on paper, but Vekrin's words had changed the calculus. He was testing her, not just as a representative of Earth but as a person. And she had a feeling that the real negotiation had already begun. She thought about the word prey. It was a biological term, a descriptor of ecological relationships, but Vekrin had used it as a weapon. It implied weakness, submission, inevitability. But prey animals were not passive. They ran, yes, but they also hid, adapted, evolved defenses. Rabbits could reproduce faster than predators could kill them. Gazelles could outrun lions. And humans had taken predators and turned them into pets, had learned to throw spears and build traps and set fires that could be seen from space. Prey was only prey until it decided not to be. She stood and walked back toward the airlock. The treaty hall was a circular chamber lined with seats for the delegates, each carved from a single piece of dark stone that had been mined from the Valorian homeworld. The lighting was dim, the air cool and dry. Vecren was already there, seated at the head of the table with two advisors flanking him. Mara took her place across from him, her datapad open, her expression calm. The other delegates filtered in, representatives from the Quarren Collective, the Sarath Dominion, and the Free Traders of Keswick. Each one acknowledged her with a nod or a brief gesture, but their attention was on Vecren. He was the senior officer, the one who set the tone. Vecren opened the session with a formal greeting, his voice resonant and measured. He reviewed the terms as they had been drafted, clause by clause, and Mara listened carefully, noting the places where the language was vague or where the obligations tilted in favor of the Valorians. When he finished, he leaned back and gestured to her. "Captain Chen, do you have any objections to the terms as presented?" She did, several, but she kept her tone neutral. "I have a few clarifications, Commander. Section 3 states that Terran mining operations in the Kuiper Belt will be subject to Valorian oversight. I'd like to propose an amendment. Oversight should be mutual. If we're granting access to our system, it's only fair that we have transparency into how those operations are conducted." Vecren's eyes flickered. Mutual oversight would slow the process. The Valorian Ascendant has centuries of experience in resource extraction. Your species does not. "True," Mara said, her voice still calm. "But experience doesn't equal accountability. If something goes wrong, if there's an environmental incident, a miscommunication, or a safety failure, both our species need to know what happened and why. Transparency builds trust, and trust is what makes treaties last." The Quarren delegate, a thin figure with pale blue skin and 3 sets of eyes, nodded slowly. "Captain Chen makes a reasonable point. Mutual oversight is standard in most joint ventures." Vecren's expression did not change, but his claws tapped once against the stone table. "Very well. We will add a mutual oversight clause. What else?" Mara glanced down at her datapad. "Section 7. The trade routes you're offering access to are secondary lanes, not primary. The primary lanes are faster and more secure. If we're giving you mining rights in our home system, we should have access to the primary routes." One of Vecren's advisors leaned forward, his voice sharp. "The primary routes are reserved for Valorian vessels and allied fleets. The Terran Expeditionary Fleet is not yet allied." "Then let's change that," Mara said. She looked directly at Vecren. "You called us prey, but prey doesn't negotiate treaties. Allies do. If you want us to be partners, then treat us like partners. Give us access to the primary routes. We'll prove we're worth it." Vecren was silent for a long moment. The other delegates watched, their expressions unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "You are bold, Captain. I will grant you that. But boldness without strength is empty posturing. How do I know your species will not become a burden on the primary routes? How do I know you will not slow our convoys or create incidents that require our intervention?" Mara met his gaze. "You don't. Not yet, but you will, because we're fast learners. We've been in space for less than 200 years, and we've already colonized 3 star systems and built a fleet that can hold its own against pirate raids and rogue AI swarms. We didn't survive by being weak. We survived by being adaptable. And if you give us the chance, we'll prove that we're not just prey. We're the species that turns predators into allies or into cautionary tales." The silence that followed was different this time. It was not electric. It was heavy. Vecren's claws stilled. His eyes locked onto hers, and she could see the calculation happening behind them. He was reassessing her, reassessing humanity, weighing the risk against the potential reward. Finally, he nodded. Very well. We will grant provisional access to the primary routes for a trial period of 2 standard years. If your fleet demonstrates competence and reliability, the access will become permanent. If not, it will be revoked. Agreed. Agreed, Mara said. The negotiations continued for another hour. Mara pushed for better terms on trade tariffs, clearer definitions of territorial boundaries, and protections for civilian vessels. Vekrin pushed back on some points and conceded on others, and by the end of the session, the treaty looked very different from the draft they had started with. When the final document was signed and sealed, Vekrin stood and extended one clawed hand. Mara took it, her grip firm. "You surprised me, Captain," he said. "That does not happen often." "Good," Mara said. "Surprises keep things interesting." She returned to her shuttle and transmitted the signed treaty back to Earth. The response came within minutes: congratulations, relief, a sense of vindication, but Mara felt something else. She felt the weight of what she had done, the promise she had made. Humanity had been granted access to the primary routes, but that access came with expectations. They would be watched, they would be judged, and if they failed, the judgment would be harsh. She thought about Vekrin's words again, prey species. The phrase still stung, but it had also clarified something. Humanity was not defined by what others thought of them. They were defined by what they did next. And what they did next would determine whether they remained prey or became something else entirely. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Mara returned to the Helios and briefed her crew on the new treaty terms. The primary routes were opened, and Terran convoys began making runs through Valorian space. At first, everything went smoothly. The routes were fast, efficient, and well protected. But 3 weeks into the trial period, Mara received a distress signal from a Terran freighter that had been ambushed by a rogue AI swarm near the edge of Valorian territory. The swarm had disabled the freighter's engines and was attempting to breach the hull. Mara dispatched the Helios immediately, but by the time they arrived, the situation had escalated. The swarm had split into 2 groups, one attacking the freighter, the other targeting a nearby Valorian patrol ship. Mara made a decision. She ordered her tactical officer to prioritize the Valorian ship. It was a risk. If the freighter was destroyed, the crew would be lost, and the trial period would be jeopardized. But if the Valorian ship was lost, the treaty itself might be at risk. She watched the tactical display as the Helios fired precision bursts at the swarm units surrounding the Valorian vessel, clearing a path for the patrol ship to retreat. Once the Valorians were safe, she turned her attention to the freighter. The swarm had breached the outer hull, but the crew had sealed themselves in the cargo bay. Mara's security team boarded the freighter, fought off the remaining swarm units, and evacuated the crew. The freighter was a loss, but the crew survived. The Valorian patrol ship transmitted a message of thanks. Mara acknowledged it briefly and returned to the Helios. She did not expect anything more, but 2 days later she received a personal communication from Vekrin. His image appeared on her screen, his expression unreadable. "Captain Chen," he said, "I have reviewed the incident report from the ambush. You prioritized the safety of a Valorian vessel over your own. Why?" Mara leaned back in her chair. "Because it was the right call. The Valorian ship had a crew of 12. The freighter had a crew of 6. The math was simple, and because if I let your people die while I saved mine, the treaty wouldn't be worth the paper it's printed on." Vekrin's eyes narrowed. "You risked your own people to save ours. That is not what prey does." "No," Mara said, "it's not. But it's what allies do." There was a long pause, then Vekrin nodded. "You are correct. I misjudged your species, Captain. That will not happen again." The communication ended and Mara sat in silence for a moment. She thought about the word interest again. Compound interest was not just about numbers. It was about time, consistency, accumulation. Every decision she made, every risk she took, added to the sum of what humanity represented. and slowly, steadily, that sum was changing the way others saw them. 3 months into the trial period, the Valorian High Council invited Mara to attend a formal reception on their homeworld. It was an honor rarely extended to new species, and Mara accepted. She traveled to Valoria Prime with a small delegation, and the reception was held in a grand hall with vaulted ceilings and walls lined with historical artifacts. Vekrin was there, along with other high-ranking officers and council members. Mara moved through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries and answering questions about Earth and humanity's expansion into space. She noticed the way the conversations shifted when she entered a group, the initial skepticism, the gradual warming, the flickers of respect. Near the end of the evening, Vekrin approached her. "Captain Chen, a moment of your time." She followed him to a quieter corner of the hall. He gestured to a large mural on the wall, depicting a battle between Valorian ships and an unknown enemy. The enemy vessels were twisted, organic, covered in spines and bioluminescent markings. "That," Vekrin said, "is the Scourge. They nearly destroyed my species 500 years ago. We survived because we were strong, because we fought, because we did not yield. Strength is what the galaxy respects. Weakness is what it devours." Mara studied the mural. "I understand that. But strength isn't just about claws and armor. It's about endurance. It's about learning from every fight, every loss, every mistake. My species didn't have claws, so we built tools. We didn't have venom, so we learned chemistry. We didn't have armor, so we invented shields and tactics and alliances. We survived because we adapted, and we're still adapting." Vekrin turned to face her. "I called you prey because I believed your species was weak. I was wrong. You are not prey. You are something rarer. You are survivors who refuse to stop evolving. That is more dangerous than any predator." Mara smiled faintly. "Dangerous isn't always bad, Commander. Sometimes it's what keeps everyone honest." He inclined his head. "Indeed, the trial period will end in 1 month. I will recommend to the High Council that your access to the primary routes be made permanent. You have earned it." Mara felt a flicker of relief, but she kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, Commander. We won't let you down." The month passed quickly. Terran convoys continued to operate smoothly on the primary routes, and no major incidents occurred. On the final day of the trial period, the High Council issued a formal decree granting humanity permanent access. The news was transmitted across the Galactic Council and reactions varied. Some species welcomed humanity's growing presence, while others remained skeptical. But the decree was binding, and the primary routes were now open. Mara stood on the bridge of the Helios, watching the stars stream past on the viewscreen. Her crew was celebrating in the mess hall, but she preferred the quiet of the bridge. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that first insult in the docking bay to this moment of hard-won recognition. She thought about the word prey and how it had become a challenge rather than a condemnation, and she thought about what came next. Her communications officer turned in his seat. "Captain, incoming transmission from Commander Vekrin." Mara nodded. "Put it through." Vekrin's image appeared on the main screen. He looked older somehow, more worn, but his eyes were steady. "Captain Chen, congratulations on the decree. Your species has proven itself, but I have a question." "Go ahead," Mara said. "You said that prey hunts back with interest. What did you mean by that?" Mara considered her answer carefully. "Interest is what you earn over time. It's not immediate. It's not loud, but it accumulates. Every time we prove ourselves, every time we help an ally, every time we turn a challenge into an opportunity, that's interest. And eventually, the compound effect is undeniable. We're not the species we were when we first stepped into the stars. We're becoming something new, and we're not done yet." Vekrin was silent for a moment. Then he nodded. "I understand, and I look forward to seeing what you become." The transmission ended and Mara turned back to the viewscreen. The stars were closer now, brighter. She felt the weight of Vekrin's words. the acknowledgement they carried. Humanity had been called prey, but they had refused to accept that definition. They had hunted back, not with violence or vengeance, but with patience, adaptability, and relentless forward motion. And the interest they had earned was just the beginning. The Helios continued its journey through the void, and Mara thought about the future. There would be more challenges, more skeptics, more moments when humanity's worth would be questioned. But she was ready. They all were, because they had learned the most important lesson of all: prey only stays prey if it accepts the label. And humanity had never been good at accepting what others told them they were. Back on Earth, news of the permanent access to the primary routes spread quickly. Celebrations erupted in cities across the planet, and the Terran Expeditionary Fleet became a symbol of humanity's growing presence in the galaxy. But Mara knew that symbols were fragile. They had to be reinforced with action, consistency, and results. She received messages from her superiors, congratulating her and asking about next steps. She replied with the same message each time: we keep moving forward. We keep earning interest. 6 months after the decree, Mara was offered a promotion, Admiral of the Terran Expeditionary Fleet, overseeing all operations in Galactic Council space. She accepted, but she made one condition. She wanted to continue leading the Helios for one more year, to see the treaty through its first full cycle, and ensure that the foundation they had built was solid. Her superiors agreed, and Mara returned to the Helios with a renewed sense of purpose. During that year, she worked to deepen humanity's relationships with other species. She met with Quarren ambassadors, Sarath traders, and free traders of Keswick. She listened more than she spoke, asked questions, offered solutions, and built trust one conversation at a time. She also maintained regular contact with Vecren, who had become something of a mentor and ally. Their conversations were always professional, but there was an undercurrent of mutual respect that had not been there before. He told her once that she had changed his view of what leadership meant, not just strength, but the willingness to adapt and learn. She told him that he had taught her the value of persistence, not just in surviving but in thriving. One evening, Mara sat in her quarters aboard the Helios, reviewing reports and thinking about the past year. She had kept a journal since the beginning of the treaty negotiations, jotting down thoughts and observations whenever she had a quiet moment. She opened the latest entry and read the words she had written after the first meeting with Vecren. He called us prey. But prey is only prey if it runs forever. What if we stop running? What if we turn around? She smiled faintly and added a new line: we turned around. And the galaxy noticed. The year ended and Mara accepted her promotion to Admiral. She handed command of the Helios to her first officer, a sharp, steady woman named Eliza Torres, who had been with her since the beginning. The transition was smooth, and Mara watched from the docking bay as the Helios departed for its next mission. She felt a pang of nostalgia, but also a sense of completion. She had done what she set out to do. She had proven that humanity was not prey. They were hunters in their own right, patient, strategic, and willing to play the long game. As Admiral, Mara's responsibilities expanded. She oversaw fleet operations across multiple sectors, coordinated diplomatic missions, and represented humanity at high-level council meetings. The work was demanding, but it was also rewarding. She saw firsthand how humanity's presence in the galaxy was evolving. They were no longer outsiders. They were participants, contributors, allies, and the interest they had earned was compounding in ways she had not anticipated. New trade agreements were signed. Joint military exercises were conducted. Cultural exchanges were established. The lines between species began to blur, not in a way that erased identity, but in a way that created shared purpose. 2 years into her tenure as Admiral, Mara received an unexpected invitation. The Valorian High Council requested her presence at a ceremony on Valoria Prime. The message was formal but warm, and it included a personal note from Vekrin. Captain Chen, your presence is requested to witness an event of great significance. I believe you will find it meaningful. Mara traveled to Valoria Prime with a small delegation. The ceremony was held in the same grand hall where the reception had taken place years earlier, but the atmosphere was different. There was a sense of anticipation, a gravity that Mara could feel in the air. She took her seat near the front, surrounded by council members and high-ranking officers. Vekrin stood at the center of the hall, his posture formal, his expression serious. The ceremony began with a recitation of Valorian history, battles fought, victories won, losses endured. Then Vekrin stepped forward and spoke. For 500 years, the Valorian species has defined itself by strength, by dominance, by the refusal to yield. These values have served us well, but they have also limited us. We have judged others by our own standards, and in doing so, we have failed to see the strength that exists in forms we did not recognize. He paused and looked directly at Mara. Captain Mara Chen, Admiral of the Terran Expeditionary Fleet, I stand before you and my people to acknowledge a truth. When I first met you, I called your species prey. I believed that strength could only exist in claws, in armor, in the visible markers of power. I was wrong. Your species has shown us that strength also exists in adaptability, in persistence, in the willingness to learn and evolve. You have hunted back, not with violence but with interest, and that interest has changed the way we see the galaxy. He stepped down from the platform and approached Mara. In his hands, he held a small object, a carved token made from the same dark stone as the seats in the treaty hall. It was shaped like a spiral, a symbol of growth and evolution. This, Vekrin said, is the mark of alliance. It is given only to those who have proven themselves worthy not just of respect but of kinship. I offer it to you and through you to all of humanity. Mara stood and took the token. It was heavier than she expected, smooth and cool in her palm. She looked at Vekrin, and for a moment she saw not a predator or a commander but a person, someone who had made a mistake and learned from it, someone who had taken a risk by changing his mind. Thank you, Commander, she said quietly. This means more than you know. The ceremony concluded with a formal declaration of alliance between the Valorian Ascendant and the Terran Expeditionary Fleet. The news was transmitted across the galaxy, and reactions were swift. Some species expressed surprise, others expressed approval. A few expressed concern, but the alliance stood, and Mara knew that it was built on something solid, not just treaties or trade agreements, but mutual respect and shared growth. She returned to Earth a week later and placed the carved token on her desk. It sat there, a quiet reminder of the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the word pray again, and how it had become a catalyst rather than an insult. She thought about the interest that humanity had earned, the compound effect of every decision, every risk, every moment of adaptation. And she thought about the future, the challenges that still lay ahead, the species they would meet, the alliances they would build. Years passed. Mara's career continued to rise. She became one of the most respected figures in Galactic Council space, known not just for her strategic mind, but for her ability to bridge gaps and build coalitions. She mentored younger officers, advocated for policies that promoted cooperation over competition, and worked tirelessly to ensure that humanity's place in the galaxy was not just secure but meaningful. But she never forgot where it all started. She never forgot the moment Vekrin called her species prey, or the moment she decided to prove him wrong. She kept the carved token on her desk, and whenever she faced a difficult decision, she would pick it up and feel its weight in her hand. It reminded her that definitions were not permanent. They were invitations to prove otherwise. On the 20th anniversary of the treaty signing, Mara was invited to speak at a council-wide summit. The summit was held on a neutral station near the galactic core, and representatives from dozens of species attended. Mara stood at the podium, looking out at the assembled delegates, and felt a surge of gratitude. She had been given a chance to represent humanity, to speak for a species that had been dismissed as prey, and to show the galaxy what humans were capable of. She began her speech with a simple question. What does it mean to be strong? She let the question hang in the air for a moment, then continued. For a long time I thought strength was about endurance, about surviving no matter what, and that's part of it. But I've learned that strength is also about growth. It's about looking at who you are, acknowledging your weaknesses, and deciding to become something more. When my species first entered the stars, we were called prey. And maybe, by some definitions, we were. We didn't have claws or venom or armor, but we had something else. We had curiosity, we had resilience, and we had the willingness to learn from everyone we met, even those who dismissed us. She paused and looked at the Valorian delegation. Vecrin was there, older now, his scales duller but his eyes still sharp. He met her gaze and nodded. "We hunted back," Mara said. "Not with violence but with interest. We earned our place here, one decision at a time, one alliance at a time, and we're still earning it. Because that's what strength really is, not the refusal to change, but the courage to keep evolving." The applause that followed was warm and sustained. Mara stepped down from the podium and returned to her seat. She felt a sense of closure, a sense that the journey she had started all those years ago had reached a meaningful point. But she also knew that the journey was not over. It never would be, because evolution was not a destination. It was a process, a continuous unfolding. After the summit, Mara returned to Earth one last time. She had been offered a position on the Galactic Council itself, a seat that would give humanity a direct voice in shaping the future of interstellar policy. She accepted, knowing that it was both an honor and a responsibility. But before she took on the new role, she wanted to visit the place where it all began. She traveled to the small town in Montana where she had grown up, a quiet place surrounded by mountains and rivers. The town had changed little since her childhood, and as she walked down the main street, she felt a sense of peace. She visited the cemetery where her grandmother was buried and stood in front of the headstone for a long time. She thought about the lessons her grandmother had taught her, about persistence, about dignity, about never letting anyone tell you what you were worth. "I did it," Mara said quietly. "I proved them wrong." She stayed in the town for a week, reconnecting with old friends and family, sharing stories of her time in the stars. They listened with wide eyes and asked questions, and Mara answered as best she could. But the thing she kept coming back to, the thing she wanted them to understand, was simple. We are not defined by what others call us. We are defined by what we do next. When she returned to the Galactic Council station, she took her seat at the council table for the first time. The chamber was vast, with seats arranged in concentric circles and a central platform where the speaker stood. Mara's seat was near the middle, flanked by representatives from the Valorian Ascendant and the Quarren Collective. She looked around the room and felt the weight of history, not just her own, but the collective history of every species represented there. The session began with routine business, trade disputes, resource allocations, security briefings. But near the end, a proposal was brought forward by a new species, one that had only recently been admitted to the Council. They were called the Tyvek, and they were smaller than most species, with pale skin and large, luminous eyes. Their representative stood at the central platform, speaking in a soft, halting voice. "We are aware," the representative said, "that we are not strong by the standards of many species here. We do not have advanced weapons or vast fleets. We are explorers, scholars, creators, but we ask for recognition. We ask to be given a chance." The chamber was silent. Mara saw some delegates exchanging glances, others leaning back in their seats. She recognized the skepticism, the dismissal, the unspoken judgment. She had seen it before. She had lived it. She stood. "Speaker Tyvek, I would like to say something." The Tyvek representative looked at her with wide eyes. The chamber fell silent. Mara spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. When my species first joined this council, we were called prey. We were told we were too weak, too soft, too inexperienced. But we didn't let that define us. We proved ourselves through action, through persistence, through the willingness to grow. And now we sit at this table as equals. Speaker Tyvek, you asked to be given a chance. I say we give it to you, because strength is not just about what you have now. It's about what you're willing to become. The Tyvek representative blinked, and Mara thought she saw the glimmer of tears in those large eyes. The chamber remained silent for a moment longer. Then Vekrin stood. I second Captain Chen's motion. One by one, other delegates stood. The Quarren representative, the Sarath representative, the free traders of Keswick. The motion passed unanimously, and the Tyvek were granted provisional membership with full support and resources to help them develop. After the session, Mara returned to her quarters and sat by the window, looking out at the stars. She thought about the spiral carved into the token on her desk, the symbol of growth and evolution. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a docking bay where she had been called prey to a council chamber where she could advocate for others who faced the same dismissal. And she thought about the future, the endless unfolding of possibilities. The galaxy was vast and humanity was still young, but they were learning, they were growing, and they were hunting back not with violence or vengeance but with interest, compound interest. The kind that accumulated over time, decision by decision, alliance by alliance, until the sum total was undeniable. Mara picked up the token and held it in her palm. It was heavy, solid, real, a reminder of where she had been and where she was going. She set it back on her desk and returned to the window. Outside, the stars stretched on forever, and somewhere among them, new species were taking their first steps into the void. Some would be called prey, some would be dismissed, but if they were anything like humanity, they would refuse to accept the label. They would adapt, they would endure. They would hunt back with interest, and the galaxy would be better for it.